Chapter 15. Abdication. A few days after the trial, Robert held court. All nobles still in the city were commanded to attend. This meant that someone from nearly every house in Westeros was in attendance. The great hall was packed well beyond capacity, with rows of nobles pushed right up to the steps that led to the Iron Throne. The galley looked terribly cramped, with everyone pressed in on each other, those at the front nearly being pushed over the railing, just so enough people could fit. Luckily for Tyrion and myself, we were given seats on the dais to the side of the Iron Throne. This was a small gratitude allowed to us for my role in the trial. After all, we didn't take up much room. The Great Hall was abuzz with rumor and speculation about what the king had called them all for. The most widely accepted rumor was that the king would be announcing his desire to wed once again, and that houses should offer up suitable candidates. Some believed that he would be instituting new laws regarding the rights of women and their duties to their husbands. Most every rumor believed that the court was called to bear witness to consequences regarding the former queen's unnatural behavior. After all, as far as everyone else was concerned, Cersei has drugged her brother and taken advantage of him. In this regard, Jaime was blameless. He may still be the Kingslayer, but he wasn't considered to be incestuous. The front row of the gallery was surprisingly silent, as it was made of people who were particularly affected by the recent events. Tywin Lannister, Stannis and Renly Baratheon, Oberyn Martell and Ellaria, and even the entire conclave of Grand Maesters who'd traveled with all haste from Oldtown after Pycelle was commanded to take the Black. The roaring whisper grew silent as the king's presence was announced. Robert and Ned walked into the Great Hall surrounded by the Kingsguard save for Sir Jaime. Tyrion and I stood from our seats and genuflected to the king as he reached the top of the dais, then took our seats after Robert sat down. Ned placed himself to the left of the Iron Throne and stood there like a dew or gargoyle. The anticipation in the room was palpable. Robert stared out at the gathered masses, seeing nothing but vultures and opportunists. His scowl said as much. He took his time scanning the room, never having seen so many people in the Great Hall since he'd first sat the Iron Throne. I could tell he was thinking that most of them only showed up when it served their purposes, or only made it a point to be seen when they thought they could take advantage of an event. The whole idea of it disgusted him. He hadn't been born to play the game, and so the game turned his stomach. After a minute of silence, Robert spoke. "These last few weeks have plagued me. That such treachery and debauchery could occur within the king's household should be unthinkable. It has mired the crown in ill rumor and has tainted the people's faith in their king. If a king cannot know the truth of his household, if he cannot manage his own wife, how can he manage a kingdom? Much less 7. I allowed the question to settle over the crowd before continuing. It was nearly 20 years ago that I took up arms against the crown to see justice done when the Mad King allowed his son to steal my beloved, to burn innocent men alive for his amusement, and was all too happy to watch the 7 kingdoms war around him. I did not take the crown because I desired it. I took it because no one else would stand up for the injustices wrought upon us all." Again he paused, letting the reminder of how he'd won the crown and why he'd done it refresh people's memories. "I was never meant to be a king," Robert continued. "I was meant to be the head of my house, to be a warrior. I know I have not been a good king, but my reign has been peaceful, and our lands have seen no wars. Political squabbling has been kept at a minimum, and your houses have enjoyed prosperity." Another pause. Another chance for those gathered to reflect on the truth of his words. "And how was I rewarded for this peace, for this prosperity?" Robert asked, the ire in his voice rising. "By treachery, by some of the most base and lecherous acts committed by my own queen, to be made a cuckold." He slammed his fist on the arm of the throne, and the vibrations could be felt through the whole of the Great Hall. Robert's anger was legendary, but his strength, while angered, was even more so. That single pounding of his fist proved it to those too young to remember him in his prime. Ned reached over and placed a hand on Robert's shoulder to calm the king. It took Robert several moments to calm down before he could continue speaking, but the fury he felt could still be seen by the red of his face. Near on 20 years' worth of peace and prosperity brought to scandal by a single woman's unnatural lust, Robert sighed. I could turn things around. I could involve myself more intimately with the running of my kingdom. I could choose a bride whose loyalty is beyond question. I could sire children enough that my bloodline could rule all of Westeros and Essos. But I would still always feel the sting of this betrayal. I would always wonder if I am still being betrayed. It would eat at the back of my mind, and I would never sleep soundly again. This train of thought led those gathered to speculate about the point of this court once more. However, I could see realization begin to light the expressions of nobles, one by one, like candle lights in the evening. They were beginning to understand the truth, and the truth shocked them. I have decided that I will end my reign as of today, Robert announced. By the end of the day, I will abdicate my throne. The great hall erupted into shocked whispers and clamoring as the repercussion of this decision would echo through the Seven Kingdoms. "Be silent!" Robert roared and immediately cowed the masses. The question of succession is not a matter for debate. I have no true-born sons or daughters able to succeed me. The Iron Throne shall instead, by right and privilege, be granted to my brother, Stannis Baratheon. A lower wave of whispers washed through the crowd, but quickly stifled itself lest Robert's anger rise again. He may not be king by the end of the day, but he was for now, which meant he could still have their heads. Robert looked down at Stannis. "Brother, will you accept the burden that is the crown?" Stannis stood, the stern expression he always wore etched onto his face. His looked back at the crowd, seeing the same vultures as Robert did, before turning his focus to the king. "I would be honored to wear the crown, Your Grace. However, I must decline the offer on behalf of myself and for the rest of House Baratheon." "What?" Robert and Renly both shouted in unison. The great hall erupted into surprised gossip and rumor mongering. One look from Robert was all it took for the gaggling to quiet down once more. Robert stood and bellowed, "What do you mean you decline?" "Explain yourself, brother." Stannis took a few steps forward, bringing him halfway up the stairs to the Iron Throne, and positioned himself so that he could look at Robert and the rest of the great hall with a simple turn of his head. "Your Grace does me great honor with the offer. However, it is the responsibility of anyone named to take up the crown to consider what is best for the realm. I believe I would be a fine king, but I would not be the best option to rule. Nor do I believe would our brother Renly." Renly began to protest, but Robert shouted him down before motioning for Stannis to continue. "House Baratheon has been tainted by your poor leadership," Stannis said to Robert, without a hint of care for Robert's reaction. "And tainted, further, by the lewd actions of your wife. Any Baratheon who sits the throne after you will carry the stigma of a failed king and the scandal which sat them on the Iron Throne. It would delegitimize any authority he may have. By your own actions, you have made our house a poor choice to rule." To say that everyone in the Great Hall was stunned to silence by Stannis's blunt truths was an understatement. Robert looked like he was ready to kill his brother on the spot, but the truth of words would be what spurred him to the action and would only serve to accentuate what Stannis had said. "If you were to offer the crown to anyone, I believe it should be offered to an individual who has time and again placed the good of the realm above everything else," Stannis continued. "Someone who was as instrumental in the rebellion, someone who has helped to ensure the continued peace in the realm, someone who has put the good of the realm above their own family." "And you know of such a person?" Robert asked, his rage only barely contained. "I do, Your Grace," Stannis said, as he motioned a hand towards me. Lady Oradoom. She broke the siege at Storm's End, brought my troops to join yours, and coordinated the Ironborn fleet to outmaneuver the King's ships and ensure the taking of King's Landing. She has organized her people into patrolling our coasts, keeping them safe from pirates and ensuring safe trade. And let us not forget that when her brothers rose in rebellion, she took her own fleet and sailed against them, killing 2 of them and many of their children in the process, all but ending their bloodline in order to ensure the king's peace. Robert looked over at me as I gave a shocked expression that Stannis would suggest naming me as monarch. What he did not know was that Stannis had been loyal to me ever since the rebellion. Stannis was pragmatic to a fault, and when I demonstrated to him that the drowned god had made the breaking of the siege possible, and what all it could do for his brother's rebellion, he'd become a devoted follower. I'd cemented his loyalty when his daughter had contracted grayscale, and he'd written to me asking for the drowned god's blessing to cure her. I had gone to Storm's End personally and used my magic to cure the girl. Ever since then, Stannis did as I bid. While his excuse for coming to King's Landing was to support his brother during the trial, his true purpose was to put forth my name as queen. You rewarded her with her own house for those efforts, Your Grace, Stannis continued. You recognized the monumental act of wiping her family line to keep the peace. Surely you must recognize that she has served the realm's best interest with every decision she has made ever since aiding our cause, since the very beginning. If I may speak, Your Grace? Ned stepped forward. Robert looked at Ned and nodded his permission. Your brother speaks true, Ned began. Lady Oradoom has shown herself to care for the good of the realm and her people. The North sees her as a stabilizing force, having stopped her people from raiding and turning their focus to fishing, trade, and patrols. Her influence has been felt ever since before the rebellion. And during the rebellion, she proved herself a true friend and ally. House Stark, and by extension, House Tully, would stand behind Lord Stannis' recommendation. As would House Martell, Oberyn said as he stood moving to join Stannis on the stairs. For too long, my sister's murder went unanswered, the death of her children ignored. Lady Oradoom put herself in more peril than necessary to get the villain responsible for these acts to confess who gave the order. House Martell sees her as an advocate of true justice. House Lannister will put its faith in Lady Oradoom as well, Tywin said, much to the surprise of every as he rose from his seat. Lady Oradoom is my good daughter and has proven herself to be above the concerns of internal squabbling. She has risked scandal by association, by bringing to light the crimes of my daughter, but has also served to bring home my eldest son, who was all but stolen from us by the Mad King. Tywin was no fool. 4 of the great houses had already backed Stannis' suggestion of me for Queen of the Seven Kingdoms, and I wouldn't be so foolish as to refuse the opportunity. That would make 5. House Oradoom might be new, but it was by default a great house as it now ruled over the territory once ruled over by House Greyjoy. Minor houses would primarily support the decisions of their liege lord, which meant I had the backing of the North, the Stormlands, the Iron Island, Dorne, and the Riverlands. House Lannister gave me the backing of the Westerlands. Now that his plans for his grandchildren to sit the Iron Throne through Cersei were no longer a possibility, he would back the plan that would put his grandchildren, through Tyrion, on the Iron Throne. Either way, in his eyes at least, the future he wanted was coming to light. His grandchildren would rule, and Jaime would be able to inherit his position as head of House Lannister. House Lannister now gave me the backing of the Westerlands. I could see the growing shock among the nobles in the Great Hall. Some were amazed. Others, however, looked angry. I could imagine why. Here I was, the bastard daughter of a House Grey, legitimized only after what amounted to a jest of a sparring match at a wedding celebration, who had climbed higher in a few decades than the entire bloodline had in all of its history, after being granted the de facto position of head of a great house, because I stopped a single raid. I was now being called on to become Queen of the Seven Kingdoms by the heads of nearly every great house, ignoring precedents, ignoring bloodline succession, historical succession, and every law that governed such things in the Seven Kingdoms. Still, there was nothing they could do when their liege lords were speaking, since the liege lords spoke on behalf of all the houses in their lands. The final nail in the coffin came with Mace Tyrell, head of house. Tyrell stood. Mace offered a soft smile that was tailored to fill the person viewing it, to see him as a well-meaning dotard. I knew for a fact that he was a shrewd and calculating man who wanted people to think of him as simple and placating, so that they would underestimate him. "Your Grace," Mace spoke up, his voice showing gentile deference. "House Tyrell has no such intimate history with Lady Oradum, but we are not ignorant of her efforts. We are the beneficiaries of her work, able to enjoy safe shipping lanes and dedicated transport of our goods, thanks to her people and the path which she set them on. And like all gathered here today, we have enjoyed these many years of peace and prosperity which you have so graciously seen us through. If these great men would speak for her, I cannot imagine I have any reason to doubt their sincerity. House Tyrell will gladly support the crowning of Lady Oradum." And there it was. 7 kingdoms, 7 endorsements, though one by proxy. The liege lords had spoken, and their bannermen would have to fall in line. No minor house would dare raise up arms against their liege, as well as the 6 other great houses who had all spoken for me. All eyes were on Robert and I, the tensions rising as the great hall waited to hear Robert's decision. Robert turned and looked at me. "Lady Oradum, come here." I stood and moved to stand before him, dipping into a low curtsy. "Your Grace, how may I serve you?" Robert motioned to Ned and the others. "The lords of the great houses have spoken for you. They believe you can sit the Iron Throne and that you can bear the burden of ruling the 7 kingdoms. I tend to agree. You've done much and more for the 7 kingdoms in your time, and always with the realm's best interest at heart. So, I ask you now, are you willing to take on the great burden of the crown?" I smiled at Robert, my expression a mixture of understanding, pity for him, and acceptance for the burden he was offering. "I am willing, Your Grace. If it is the will of the 7 kingdoms that I sit as queen, then I will take on that duty." "So be it then," Robert nodded. He looked up at Ned. "Prepare a succession ceremony for tomorrow morning. All who are in attendance now must attend." Ned bowed his head. "As you command, Your Grace." Robert scanned the nobles in the great hall. "I expect you all to conduct yourselves as befitting your stations during this transition, and that you will, as your oaths demand, keep the king's peace, and then gladly swear your allegiance to your new queen. Court is dismissed." The slow process of nobles dispersing from the great hall gave everyone time to reflect on what had just happened. Tywin, Stannis, Oberyn, and Mace joined Robert, Ned, and myself on the dais, all the power of Westeros together in one place for the first time in decades. "This was an unexpected turn of events," Oberyn grinned. "I am glad to have been a part of it." "Indeed," Mace chuckled and looked down at me. "May I say, my lady, that I look forward to seeing how you will rule in the coming years. If Highgarden can be of any assistance to you, you need only ask." Stannis glared down at me. "The same can be said for the Stormlands, of course. And do not worry about Renly. I'll box his ears for speaking out of turn." "Speaking of those who did not take this turn of events well," Robert said as he stood, towering over us all, "I expect you lot to support Lady Oradum, especially early on. Not all of those in the crowd were pleased with this result." "Of course, Your Grace," Ned reassured him. "Lady Oradum has aided us all in one form or another over the years. It is only right that we stand by her during this transition as well." I smirked up at Ned. "You're just buttering me up, so I'll let you return north." Robert barked out a laugh and clapped me on the shoulder, the blow causing my knees to shake. "She knows you too well, Ned. It would seem quick preparations will need to be made, Tywin interrupted the jovial moment. I will cover the cost of what needs to be done to make the ceremony something worth remembering. If Lord Tyrell will assist me in sending for the supplies throughout King's Landing. Mace gave a wide, placating smile. Oh, of course. It would be my pleasure to assist in making ready the festivities. It would seem we all know our roles, Ned said. Let's get to work, my lords. With that, the group dispersed, set on preparing for the next day, leaving Robert and I to figure out how the ceremony would be performed.